for a signal. Adam, are we? Good morning. My name is Ken Joslin. I'm a member of Westminster Social Justice Forum Committee. Oh, not me. Okay. We're talking about masks and COVID protection, and we are serious about that here. So it's going to be a small group here, but there are a number of people online. I'm going to be introducing Tamra Stark, who is from Tubman. But before I do, I just want to share that the Social Justice Forum theme for the program year 2021 and 2022 is diving deeper together so we can all flourish. And this builds on the heightened sense that we all are aware of the systemic and critical issues affecting our community, which have been brought to much greater attention in recent years, and especially in response to the murder of George Floyd. And through these forums, we hope we are learning more about these needs, but also that we're becoming prepared to act and support things that will result in flourishing of members of all members of our community. This is Tamra Stark, who works at Tubman. She is the Senior Director of Housing and Youth Development. She's been there since 1998 and has a lot of experience with areas that all have roots in violence, but spread out to every aspect of life. And obviously her title says includes youth, and that's a focus that we're going to hear more about. I was struck as I read her bio that early on in her career she did theater. And I think she may share a little bit about how that has impacted her ability to really see things from broad perspectives. I think I will not say more about the various aspects that you do, but allow you to share that. Thank you for being here. And we will have time for some questions at the end. So for those who are not in the room, those can be entered in the chat opportunity at the bottom of the screen. And we'll be looking at those and share those at the end. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you so much for having me. I see this as the beginning. I hope this isn't the only time we get to connect. And those people joining virtually as well, I want to be available to connect further. We have a lot of needs in our communities, as we know, that have been greatly exposed during the pandemic, yet also things we've seen for a long time. And I know the youth call to action is they want to see us rise up, be true about long-term investments to change, and see them as whole beings who have ideas, hopes, and dreams. I know as a young person, I benefited from people who believed in me, despite challenges faced, people who said, you can do this. People not only that showed up with words, but also showed up to provide resources, guidance, and also saw leadership in me that maybe I didn't always see in myself. And I hear that theme repeated with a lot of the young people we serve across our range of programs. So at Tubman, we are an agency that works metro-wide, providing services to people of all ages, all backgrounds, and all genders. One thing people don't often know is that youth and young adults are the largest number of people we serve. And that includes serving youth in schools, through our violence prevention and leadership programs, in homes, in all our range of programs, and youth housing, including housing that exists in sites across the metro. As you can imagine, the pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities in our society as it speaks to aspects of housing stability, healthcare access, all the challenges in schooling. We had youth that did not have the technology needed to engage in virtual options when schools converted. Fortunately for the youth we were serving, we were able to adapt and help equip with that, connect with the schools to make sure they had that basic access. And then we also had a lot of youth continuing to want to drive changes. They're looking at what's happening and saying, we've known about these challenges for a long time. How are we going to show up differently to support some of the challenges? How are we going to guarantee that people have access to healthcare so that they can thrive? How are we going to say it's no longer tolerable that people are homeless due to violence? That is, how are we going to show up and recognize that youth have experiences with violence themselves and are trying to help each other as best they can as peers? I'll call upon that too. As a high school student, I had a unique opportunity to be a part of a peer counseling program. I think back on that, and I think it probably led to where I'm at today as far as really invested in how communities can come together in very simple ways without complication and help each other. We saw that a lot during, I think, the pandemic. I think we saw that showing up a lot more as people were helping each other with food support, the basics, helping to navigate complicated systems, and also calling to action as far as, hey, if I have a place, how can I show up differently to make sure there aren't barriers to someone renting a space? There's a lot of barriers for youth who need housing. There's certainly a lot for adults. One thing I think for youth in particular is people aren't aware of the extra barriers they'll face if they are living on their own, if they don't have a safe place to go. And that's something that requires a lot of partnership support, a lot of different engagement in all the systems, school systems, healthcare systems, criminal justice system. How are we going to show up and recognize that need and make sure that we're saying no more, no more? People need a steady, safe, reliable place to stay. That is key to building strong and thriving futures. We know this in our hearts. We know this. I see day to day too many people working so hard, so hard, and still not being able to have the basics, okay? And a lot of that is rooted. I'm appreciative this is the Social Justice Forum because a lot of that is rooted in implicit bias, the racism that's embedded in some of our policies and practices. And I see a lot in our work, we try and put these challenges only on an individual. Well, you just got to plow through. You'll overcome this. And people are plowing through. They're working really hard to overcome these challenges. And some of our policies rooted in discrimination, housing being one, remain to be challenges. So for example, we see young people whose parents, largely Black and brown youth, their parents have been impacted as well by financial instability, housing instability, children who have grown up in shelters, so their education has been disrupted, unstable. Their dreams about ever having a steady place to stay or a job they can count on, because transportation is a challenge, people aren't believing in them, their foundation is shaken. It's shaken. And we have a chance to look at all that and not get defensive about it, just say this is what's going on. What can an individual influence in this? What can I influence in this so it's different? And what policies need to change so that these conditions don't continue? And so we hear that from youth too. They have great ideas about what they want to see different in their school environments. They're seeing things that adults aren't. They're experiencing violence at far younger ages than people realize. For example, youth 24 and under, a lot of people don't know this, are more at risk of experiencing violence of all forms than any other age group. That also is very disruptive, of course, to someone's well-being. And we're not investing in the opportunities to help equip and listen and respond to youth about their experiences, about their ideas, about the basics of learning. We ask youth, where have you learned models of relationships? Wow. They think about that. Well, I see some stuff on social media, maybe my family, friends. And then we ask, how are those examples speaking to you? What are some positives? And they'll be able to name some positives. They also have ideas about what they want to see more of in that space. And we ask adults the same question. Adults are often like, well, have similar answers. And so a lot of people feel like we've never really learned how to be in the space of having a healthy relationship. What does that look like? What does that mean to me? That poses a big risk as far as the future for, how we're going to show up differently in relationship. When young people learn that violence is okay in a relationship, it's just what is, that continues, okay? So we also have programs that help people who have used violence overcome those challenges. And that's really, really critical. It can't all be on the person who survived violence to solve the challenges, and that's basically how we have a lot of things set up. And I think if we are really listening to people directly experiencing these challenges faced, listening deeply, we will come up with very, very different solutions, making sure we have the leadership integrated of the people we're serving. I feel very fortunate that at Tubman, across the span of our work, we have co-created programs. We have opportunities where people directly impacted are giving back, leading changes out there, and compensated for that, because it's so important that their expertise is valued in a way that a lot of times that perspective is sidelined and undervalued. An example, wanted this website up. It's just a small example. It's our mydefinition.org website that way back in 2009, youth basically said, we want our own space to showcase our ideas, our art, our poems. They have blog posts, and they're like, we want people to see the perspective we have on issues that matter to us. So I do encourage you, if you're connected with youth too, help them check this out, get involved. I really think when youth and faith communities in particular come together, things do change as well. History shows us that. And there's so many examples. And I think we can live into that more fully in so many ways. And I want to make sure too, to share that I keep hearing from people directly impacted, people who know someone who's been directly impacted by violence, homelessness, mental health challenges, addictions, other traumas, discrimination. They're not asking for things that are really complex at all. They're identifying challenges, and they're providing basic, simple solutions. The challenge is on us to invest very differently. How are we going to show up and invest beyond only responding to crisis, yet also invest in prevention? And that means housing. That means thriving careers, thriving wages. That means transportation and healthcare. That means quality schooling. We know the rates, the school to prison pipeline is real. We've known that a long time. How are we looking at that early on and listening to the students and families impacted in that way, so that they're not, losing that hope and not losing the belief that they deserve a high quality education that represents and reflects contributions of people that look and have experiences like them, okay? So those are a lot of the main things we hear about, and people are striving for them. They are taking the steps. I think there's a common assumption that, well, the people you're talking about, Tamra, they're draining us. They're draining the system. I haven't seen that. I can say I've worked in a lot of different roles in my career. I've worked in juvenile justice prior to being at Tubman. I've worked in special education as well. And I never experienced anyone I was serving as being a drain. I saw people as trying their best. And I saw a lot of unnecessary barriers, and still do, getting in the way. So that's our challenge. How are we going to show up and invest differently in longer term solutions, and partner as well with people directly impacted on their ideas? And how do we value their expertise and leadership? I want to take a pause for questions at this time. I know I've gone through a lot. Yes.
quirky question, and that is, on the website, it says about, I usually know what that's gonna lead me to. Then it says quizzes.
Yes,
videos.
yes. So we have some quizzes about healthy relationships, like so to see if, and they're the content's prepared by youth too, things they want to know about. And then we work with developing and designing with in partnership with youth. So it will be little quizzes about, do you know the perspectives about what goes into a healthy relationship? Uh, we deliver an intensive prevention curriculum in schools that helps navigate what healthy relationships are. It's very interactive. And so all this content also was shaped by youth as far as what they want to see on a website. I will also say youth have kept us really on the cusp of technology. So as many people experienced with the pandemic, wow, we need to go virtual with a lot of things. Youth pushed us in that direction many years ago by saying, we want text options, we're texting. How do we get to text in contact with your programs? We have a text line. We did that without funding to make that happen. We also, same with social media. Youth were like, we're on social media. This is many, many years ago. We want to opt in virtually. And we had to really advocate hard to make sure that we could respond to those requests. And that's sort of an interesting area too, because those are still not, I think things are well resourced with funding. They're things we're really committed to, and so we work to make happen. And I think with all the work in our spaces, I have a huge thanks to youth because they're the ones that have identified new opportunities, new ways of doing things. And when we're listening and responding and carving that space, that's where our present is and that's where our future thrives. Thank you for that question. Does that answer? Any other? Yes.
So I know you're doing so many really interesting things at Tubman, and I love having you sharing some of them. Could you take a couple minutes to talk about some of the programs you've launched, especially with the pandemic and all of the things that have happened at your doors
Absolutely.
to really make improvements for our community?
Thank you. Yes. So the question was programs launched, especially during the pandemic, and how that's been, how is that improving things? I think the conversions for technology, making sure technology can be accessible, is definitely one. So we had support groups, for example, telehealth appointments for mental health, home visits, obviously to uphold COVID protocols, but converted also to virtual options and made sure the people we were serving were equipped in order to participate. With some of the youth support groups, we also had mailed, because they're interactive, so they come with some items that you use to create games, and we made sure those were mailed to people's home addresses. We also of course, continue to partner very deeply with a lot of our community-based partners who provide additional health support. And so making sure that those services were accessible. So that means healthcare access for teens. Sometimes they can be turned away from services when they're seeking independent care. And so to have someone who can help advocate and make sure their needs are still met is really important. And we were able to show up in that space. Court, we do serve people as well in court, and that helping make sure that people weren't falling behind or missing information that was being mailed to them, as courts across the metro were going through various transitions of their own. So making sure that there was that clarity and that we could help support and make sure people had access to participate virtually in different spaces that way too. Demand for food insecurity, of course, rose. It's and spread, and at the same time people had their own particular healthcare challenges, meaning that they weren't going out in, weren't interested in going out in public as much either. And so we partner with a place who does some food prepackaged food and can mail it direct or have food delivery drivers go to the home. I will say a lot of our services broadly are supported and continue to be by volunteers and interns. And I just want to call attention that a lot of volunteers and interns we were impacted by the pandemic too. And so that meant if people had health vulnerabilities, their ability to commit to volunteering changed. So we were working in that space too. And I think it really exposed to people largely how really vulnerable some of our infrastructure can be. And so while I'm super happy and proud, we were able to really meet needs as they were coming forward and adapt very flexibly. I think it has been a little bit of a wake-up call to a lot of places about how we have to make sure these opportunities are sustainable and that people have a safety net, a larger safety net. As shaken as everyone was, I think there was a lot of commentary about we're all in this together, and there are some people much more vulnerable to the challenges the pandemic posed on all levels, also including, education and healthcare access, housing. It really changed things. We also, with the experiences of violence, public transportation, while it's fairly challenging, I believe, in our metro area anyway, and for people who've experienced violence, public transit is often not a safe option because of stalking or concerns about being followed. We do a lot of safety planning around that, and still there's times when being able to have options beyond public transit is very, very helpful for people, even with all the safety planning that goes into it. So those are just a few examples, and I could go on. Yes. And I would say too, the longer term investments that are so important is relates to employment as well. So if for example, someone needs to, I think a lot of people have shorter stays in shelter, and that is really hard to get ahead on the job front if your housing isn't something more predictable. And so I think that's also why we hear a lot from people about wanting solutions that will lead to longer term change, knowing that crisis response is definitely needed, and what are some investments that will deliver on the more sustainable longer term solutions. And a lot of what we're discussing today, again, is not new needs in Minnesota, in the US in general. And so like I said, I think our call to action is how we show up differently to respond and invest in those longer term solutions. Any other questions?
How do most youth come to you? And my guess, and I'm a doc, so I have some experience kind of seeing the breadth of barriers. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. I probably should turn this on. What I was saying is, how do youth arrive with you? And as a physician, when I see, whether it's a youth or an adult, with these kind of problems, very often there were tons of barriers. There's not one.
Yeah, tons.
And so how do you work with an individual? Maybe you can walk me through what would happen, how a person would present, and then pick any of the barriers you want. What is it that Tubman does that gets them eventually to a safer, more productive?
Absolutely. So the question being, how do people get in touch with us? So we really work at youth in particular, and thank you for the recognition of the extra barriers youth face. I think youth have demanded of us, and we have responded with having multiple low barrier options to get support. We carve that path in partnership with youth, and it's been a barrier in itself, because a lot of other people would ask, well, what do you mean a youth can refer themselves into a program? What do you mean a youth can call because they can call our helpline, they can text, they can stop into different places. So it does a bit depend on the program. For our housing work, youth do go through, we partner with the counties. And so the counties actually do the referral into our housing program if we have an opening. And then we have the young person is matched with a youth and family worker specific for housing, and they get intensive long-term support for 2 years, including financial support if needed to help sustain their housing, so that they're better equipped with the basics and overcoming the trauma, getting some support in navigating their basic needs, also their short and long-term goals. So that's the structure of how that works. And then also engaging young people in different leadership opportunities. I get a lot of questions about, well, youth leadership, is that, and this is from youth, does that mean I have to get up and speak in front of people? No. There's many ways of leadership. So we really customize it to what a young person wants to build on and how they want to contribute, if that's an interest in of theirs as well. And so that is for housing. I would say for some of our other programs for youth, it's more a direct call. They are, so it's for the housing part, that's how the county has it set up. If we had our overall wishes, it would be that people could directly refer, which they can for some of our other youth programs. They can directly get in touch with us, again, by text, by web enrollment. We have some programs they can just enroll in and want just hear more about all the options on the table. That's one thing. There's a lot of misinformation out there, as I'm sure you're aware, about what youth can and can't do and what they can and can't access. And that's why we have it set up that way, that it's phone, social media reach out, text reach out, drop in person. We do have a, outreach space at a mall, an area mall as well. It's volunteer run, so that's another option where youth can just kind of get some basic resource information, connect with people. We have clothing and food support options too, the employment resources. We really work to carve that space where also any provider can refer a youth to. So an adult, a doctor, any medical, anyone working in any system really, if they see a youth that is kind of having some challenges in certain areas of whether housing instability, questions about careers, safety challenges, why get involved in leading change to violence, if it's not a match for anything we do, we have a big connection as well with a whole host of community partners too that we will help navigate. Because that's, I think, some of the bigger barriers that we've had on that have come from like adults thinking a referral into a program can only come from an adult. And that's why it's really important to us to make sure that youth can directly refer, and we help them know their rights as well, and what to expect that may be challenges, and connect them accordingly. We do legal services as well, and then work with some partners who do some very specific youth law support as well through collaborations. Did you have any further questions on that?
Oh, I'm loaded with questions. Being in the health field,
Yeah.
obviously you come with health problems,
Yeah.
as we all do. What kinds of resources are you able to find? Do you link with other sources? I assume you don't have medical on staff, but maybe you do.
We have a clinical department. I should mention too, I'm a trained therapist. I've worked in the space with adolescent and family and early childhood therapy spaces too. We have a outpatient clinic, and they're some licensed practitioners. Our youth work broadly is like youth workers, so they're going through more of a youth development lens. And then our partners definitely are with different teen clinics. We have some, because they're a little more attentive. We have youth experiences being really positive, and we do pay attention to that. Like, where are they having some positive experiences where some settings know their rights and are also invested in protecting them. And then with some of the larger healthcare facilities, we've had really good experiences too. So, and if there's a breakdown, we just get releases if the young person is okay with that, rights to coordinate care. We have a whole process for coordinating care. So if they're working with someone else at another variety of places, including healthcare, as long as they're giving permission for that, we are helping to coordinate their care. If for some reason they don't want us in that space, which is very rare. If they don't want that, though, we're helping them equip them with questions they can bring to the table if they have concerns, or making sure their rights are protected. We did, interestingly, with I think initially when the pandemic broke out, there was a lot of news talking about the youth and young adults, well, young adults in particular, being really hesitant to get the vaccine when it was available for young adults, and a lot of misinformation being driven on social media. So we made sure to connect with our health care partners on resources specific to like the adolescent audience. And if you hear me say young adults in that, young adults are considered, as adolescents as well, as up to 24. And so just related to some brain development pieces, and so, as I'm sure you're well aware, and other social factors. So we make sure to try and give the information from the sources that are deemed reliable from healthcare, and that speak to the young people we serve, right, in messages that they relate to. I say all that because we had a few youth that were then interested in the vaccine, in their teen years, and were turned away from some of the clinics because people were like, oh, I should say the 16, 17-year-olds, once that became available for that age group, the vaccine, we had people that were, it threw some health providers off. They were like, we need your parent or guardian to sign off on this. So we were able, because of our public health connections, we knew that that was not accurate. So we talked to our public health folks. They were able to coordinate a response with those providers and make sure that the youth could get access. But so I think youth just face layers and layers of barriers. And then on top of it, sometimes they'll have, especially youth who are living independently, we have to make sure that any information about them that's to be protected information is not compromised, and be really clear about what to do if someone did find out that wasn't safe for them to find out about their own access to healthcare. So, and that's something where we get guidance with some additional resources as far as legal support too, so they can hear straight from a legal standpoint what's going to be upheld and sometimes what's not, so they know the risks involved. Yes.
We have a question from the chat. Thank you, Ken. Can you talk a little bit about the public schools and what relationship Tubman has, and share a little bit about how that works?
Absolutely. So one thing before my time actually at Tubman, Minneapolis public school teacher was noticing a lot of violence going on in the schools, and came to Harriet Tubman Center at the time to see what could be done to and so we were actually one of the state's first teen dating violence relationship program. It's since evolved over the years, really with youth input. So it's a co-developed program, and this with students who go through it, review it, provide updates in partnership with our staff. And then we also have, at some of the districts, the schools, they have curriculum specialists who have reviewed the content as well. Our partnership with the schools is really broad depending on the district. So I'll focus, I would say some have direct referrals into some of our programs, whether it's for youth housing, whether it's for our youth. We have an intensive home-based program for youth who have experienced violence or who have been identified as at risk because they've been caught up in the criminal justice system. And that's a long-term support where we're helping to hear what's going on at school, what's going on with family, and then really center the youth's experience. what's your perspective on all this? Where, what would you like to see different? And so that's a real strong referral for the schools in. We also have school faculty that provide some additional educational support by tutoring. So they'll, knowing that some of the youth in our programs, whether in shelter or housing, need some extra help catching up because often the youth we serve have not had stable housing in some of our intervention programs. And so the schools partner that way too, and are really great in recognizing what what the puzzle we're trying to solve. And they see their part in that for sure. I think we also, some schools are, invite us in to really embed that healthy relationships and leadership, and have some good practices too of their own initiatives at the school level of, okay, how can we work together to collaborate on making the school climate better? So for example, we know we haven't ended violence that's happening in schools. We know that there's dating violence still. We know that there's violence in families and with friendships and out in the communities. And how do we put this package together as community members? And the schools really show up. They see it. They live it too. They want to connect youth to opportunities so that they can overcome those challenges. Yeah.
If you wanted to volunteer to be a mentor, who do you contact, the principal or our counselor?
So at the schools, I wouldn't be able to speak directly for the schools. As far as I think the schools, you could contact them, any school, and see about volunteer opportunities. For Tubman, yeah, we do have a host of volunteer opportunities. Yeah, including yeah, absolutely. So we definitely welcome people as they are able. We do have special, COVID protocols now, of course, that we uphold and make that clear. So there's a process people go through. We really need long-term volunteers. I can say that's a big need. And then we also have volunteers in. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's in our programs, there's definitely a whole way, lots of opportunities. So we do have a link on our website about how you could apply if you're interested, and then you just specify your interest. That could be anything from homework help. It could be doing some of the food delivery. It could be answering helplines. We have a 24/7 helpline as well, that when volunteers or interns aren't able to staff it, then our paid staff are. So there, support group facilitation. We have a great training and supervision plans to go into those opportunities. So hopefully people feel well supported, but I can definitely say that longer term volunteer needs, because of the training that goes into it, it's really helpful for us to have long-term volunteers. Otherwise, people are getting trained and then done. And so I would welcome your involvement. Absolutely.
To that point, we have an active youth group here at Westminster. Are there specific asks you have for any of those individuals or as a group that they should be considering?
Yeah, so we do a fair amount of youth will be interested in doing youth drives. I think that's something, even with youth we serve, like connecting them to ways they're wanting to give back, right? So even youth who have experienced a lot, they're really invested in giving back to their communities and showing up that way. And so thank you for that. I think there's several ways people can contribute with drives, sharing perspectives, what they're seeing amongst their friends. We're still really trying to build out peer support programs too. And then I would say our leadership groups that we offer are place-based, so it's not like people only need to come to us. It's like we can go to those groups too. I say that as someone who grew up doing youth groups in the church I went to, and I think there's a real complementary way the expertise we have can be matched with some of the existing youth groups here too, where, for example, one of our youth educators can partner with the people leading those groups because, we're not all experts in everything. And so how we collaborate together really makes a powerful difference.
I have a question going further with volunteering, but one thing I do, we're asking a lot of questions. If we're derailing some things you would like us to go away knowing about Tubman, take it back for a minute.
Oh, yeah.
And say that. And then
Yes.
we'll keep asking.
Yeah, one thing I want to, no, not derailing at all. I think this is how this form's structured. I think this is how we can have good two-way communication and engaged opportunities that really match what you're interested in knowing about too. Knowing this is just the start, and we'll keep going too into the future with this, hopefully as collaborators. I would say that one thing I think may not be well known, but very well supported in data too. People that we serve in our shelter housing programs and then our youth intervention programs are nearly all low income, Black and brown, including disproportionately Black and brown LGBTQ plus at times. So I just say that because I think it's really important that we're attending to solutions that truly work for all and recognizing why it's just those programs. It's not reflective of the general population. It's very disproportionate. So you see the disproportionate impact of housing access. You see the disproportionate impact of the economics of it, the financial access to just wealth building. You see the disproportionate impact of our criminal justice system on families, and that's why that's why we have those disparities. So I just really want to punctuate that, and that's also why I think the looking at what are the policies creating these conditions is so key to overcoming these challenges as well, because individuals are doing everything they can and facing barriers at every turn. And I can speak to that too. Before I was at Tubman, those disparities showing up. When I worked in juvenile corrections, I grew up in a smaller town. That was predominantly white. So our family was unique, and I worked in juvenile corrections. I was like, why is everyone here Black in the juvenile correction space? And then and for crimes that were pretty I was like, wow, this stuff's going on a lot more places and youth aren't being locked up for it. So what's really going on here? It really piqued my interest and surprised me. But I'm a tenacious person, so and then I also looked at their family histories, and it was like, wow, all the youth on top of it, and this remains today. Youth who are disproportionately justice involved have experienced homelessness. So, and then we know violence. Violence is a threat across all backgrounds, all economic backgrounds too, all race, ethnicity. And there's a different impact. People homeless due to violence, it looks very different. That's people who are already struggling with the basics due to the racism and implicit bias that we have embedded. And that shows up across all the systems. So Ken and we spoke a little earlier about ACEs studies, for example, for adverse childhood experiences. We've done a lot of work in that space over the years. And one thing that was very glaring to some of us was it didn't account for the stressors of discrimination. So we know that racism is literally leading to people having shorter lives because of that toxic stress that's carried. The running theme in your mind of, did this happen to me because of who I look like, because of a judgment? That's internally stressful. I know there's changes now with the adverse childhood experiences accounting for that. Yet the people who have faced it and lived it notice that right away about those studies first coming out. Like, well, this part, no one's assessing for this. And so I'm really happy for those changes. And so I think lots, and I'm a hopeful person. I do not share this to be defeated and, oh no, what do we do? I share because as we identify problems, we know we can find solutions to overcome them. And the better we are prepared with a shared understanding of the problems, the better we are prepared to put together stronger solutions for brighter futures.
We have another question from the chat. You had mentioned stable housing and safe schools as a piece of the puzzle. What other pieces are important for preventing or addressing relationship violence in particular?
Yes, yes. So I think that baseline of, you know, what is a picture of a healthy relationship? We have lots of pictures of relationships that aren't healthy. We have teachers, for example, in the schools are like that host one of our programs as an example, and are like, oh my gosh, if I would have learned this when I was younger, that may have changed some things about how I look at myself in relationship to others, what I deserve, what I expect. And we also say that knowing that people can have unpredictable things happen still, even when you know what a healthy relationship is. So I think that, no judgment, it's like, and resource connection, like know where to go, where can you get some extra help to overcome those challenges. There's a lot around care for people who've experienced violence, and it still can, there's a lot of shame. So I think taking away shame is really important. And I would say we hear from youth a lot about, we also want, like, they'll self-identify. I will say this a little more readily, it seems, than adults. Youth will identify when they're concerned about their own behaviors. That's a golden nugget. That's a lot to build off when they're like, I'm hearing this and I'm worried I might not be behaving in the way I want to be to someone else, whether it's a friend, a sibling, a dating partner, and they want to do better. It's like, let's go with that. That's awesome. And I think we need to create a lot more spaces that are able for people to come forward as someone who's experienced violence as a victim, and also if someone's concerned that they're using violence or harming another. And what does that look like? And youth have really, throughout my career, punctuated that point. And I see sometimes adults having a harder time with that space. Yet I do think it's key to overcoming some of these challenges too. So even social emotional support for each other, care for each other. How are we setting up communities where we can care for each other, right? I think as some of the greatest examples I have and hear from others is about when we're invested in each other's success and doing well, and when we know that we deserve that we fully deserve to have life and possibilities and the basics to thrive.
I'm going to ask another question.
Yes.
Addresses, my understanding is they can be critically important for so many connections into programs. I think you maybe touched on this at the beginning when you talked about COVID and getting written material, et cetera. How do you deal with the youth that have no addresses?
So that's another part where I think there's some school developments I've been really happy about, a greater recognition over school developments. For example, when you enroll in the public schools anyway, there's a lot more where they're trying to see, do you currently have a place to live? If not, how are we connecting you with resources, and what additional outreach needs might we need to attend to? So that's been a really great development. I think we actually really need flexible funding, so it's not only tied to addresses because of that. And that's sometimes, I think, not well recognized in designing things, as far as if people are unstably housed or living with others, because that's a big part of hidden homelessness, including youth homelessness, right? Is staying with friends or family, and they're not always counted in these data captures or even quote unquote considered homeless. And so I think making sure that we can be accessible broadly in a variety of ways where it's and have partnerships. So if it's a service area we're not in, who is going to be able to support them? Because I think the one, as much as possible, that first person, it could be any of you all, right? The first person being equipped with some basic info so that someone doesn't have to run around and get lost in the shuffle. Because I think that happens a lot. People get lost in the shuffle. They've reached out maybe once and were turned away for something, or they reached out and were given misinformation. And so who is a steady person? And again, that can be anyone. You don't have to be trained in a whole bunch of stuff to be that connector, right? So I think that is super helpful as well. And I want to say local solutions are important. So it's just, and what do we do for people who aren't identifying as yet having one address, and how that can be in and of itself a barrier to accessing services. It's not for us, and a lot of places it can feel like it is. Does that answer your question?
Part of it, obviously. It's a big question.
It's a big question.
We're nearing the end. You touched on volunteering. And maybe there are people listening who would want to get connected. Can you say more about the variety of opportunities? Because, I mean, you mentioned tutoring. Some people love tutoring. Other people, that's frightening to them or whatever.
Yeah.
You mentioned the hotline, which obviously would take a fair amount of training. Mention as many possible different varieties of volunteering that
Absolutely.
could happen through Tubman.
They're pretty much the range you can imagine. Whatever special skill you have. For example, it could be doing donation drives. It could be fundraising circle drives. It could be behind the scenes grant writing. It could be partnering with us. We partner with a lot of statewide coalitions in our different impact areas to policy changes. You know, it can be connecting others to know more about these topics. So you could be a trained ambassador about Tubman. There's behind the scenes work to be done as far as logistics that's critically important to our work, to powering our work forward. So I think there's also creative aspects, loving to hear from people's personal career journeys too, helping people see and hear more about careers that aren't always known. That's very helpful for youth. It's also helpful for adults. We have a lot of financial volunteers too who help people with the basics of financial management and taking that fear away. One thing with experiences of violence is 99% documented. So I say probably 100% of people who experience violence have also experienced financial abuse, sadly. So there's a lot of shame around that. And that starts very young. We have youth who have been exploited often too financially already at very young ages, where someone maybe has used their name and put different bills in their name as minors. And that's a lot to overcome. And so, you know, expressive arts are very healing. And so if there's a gift or talent there too, those are a host of opportunities. Like I mentioned too, the phone lines are really great option, can be pretty flexible as far as availability too, for people to help answer and respond on the 24/7 helpline. So really, I encourage people to check out the postings available. Group facilitation's another, just it goes on and on. We do have a list of what we're seeking often for volunteers, and are open to ideas and hearing what maybe not on the list that you can contribute uniquely to. So it's our volunteer intern department really does a good guided practice with that to help people think about what will make sense in their lives.
I think we're just about at the end. So I want to thank you. This is really good. I think it was mentioned at the beginning that you're one of Westminster's community partnerships. Would you say one word about the partnership? What is I'm sorry. No time? Okay, thank you. Next week, on the 5th, the speaker is going to be Michelle Garnett McKenzie talking about advocacy for human rights. So for those who are coming, it'll be in this room, otherwise online. And again, thank you very much for bringing this issue.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.